Part one was gloomy, wasn't it? The narrative was awful, the story is terrible, our situation is dire. And I said to you right at the beginning of part one that you might feel some emotions during that presentation. You might feel, if I can recall, frustrated that we've allowed this situation to go on as far as it has, maybe even angry that we've had, rage perhaps. You might have felt a bit numb. You might have felt scared for yourself, for your children, for your grandchildren. You may have felt sad at what we've lost, what we will lose, and what we still might lose if we don't do something about this. You might have grieved. Now, those emotions, as I said to you, are entirely appropriate, and I didn't want you to push them away. Given those emotions, given how you felt, and given the situation that we are in, hands up who'd like to do something about this, which is every single hand in the room. That's reassuring to see. By the way, you're not the only one that feels that we should do something about this. This chap here too also thinks that we should do something about this.
It really isn't an exaggeration to say that the future of the human race is now at stake. The nature of the changes in climate and environment that we're living with threaten not only the well-being, but possibly the very being of our species and this planet in the long term. And in the middle term, they threaten some of the most vulnerable populations on Earth. It's not at all surprising that people in this urgent situation feel they've got to take non-violent, direct action. They've got to find a way of putting the case for the human race before those in power. That's what Extinction Rebellion is doing, that's what the Friday strikes are doing. And that's why I believe a wide, deep support from the public is needed to bring this matter fully to the attention of our political leaders, to show that we can actually achieve democratic change for the good of everybody in our world as well as in this country.
Right then, so, well, what are our demands? Well, demand number one from Extinction Rebellion is this: declare a climate and ecological emergency. Declare it. Now, actually, Parliament has declared a climate and ecological emergency, inspired by, no, prompted by the school strikes and Extinction Rebellion. It has. But government hasn't. And declaring a climate and ecological emergency at the moment is just words. There's nothing binding attached to that. So we have definitely made progress, we have, but there's still a lot to do on demand one. Demand two is this: well, zero carbon by 2025. You can see that there's two parts to this. I'll talk about the second part in a moment, but zero carbon by 2025. That's net zero carbon, by the way. There'll still be some carbon coming up into the atmosphere, but it's net zero because we'll be drawing down, that's the demand, so that we are net zero. Now, we don't have the technology actually to draw that carbon back down, though there is an ancient technology that you can use, and it's called a tree. So we need to plant trees, I mean billions, literally, of trees, and we've got to rewild nature and marine habitats and lowland habitats and wet habitats, and we've got to draw down that CO2. And that's good because, well, zero carbon by 2025 is very, very necessary, and by rewilding nature, well, we also hit the second part of this, which is halt biodiversity loss, of course. But let's go back to the 2025 zero carbon by then. You might say to me, Robin, that's really ambitious, isn't it? Zero carbon, net zero carbon by 2025. Really? Can we do that? I mean, that's like 5 or so years ahead. Well, we have to. Yes, it is ambitious. And it's right that it has to be ambitious because of what's at stake. Remember Deborah Roberts, co-chair of the Impacts Committee, she says, we must act now. Remember Eric Solheim? He said, remember that piercing smoke alarm he was talking about, which is Special Report 1.5? He says, we have to put out the fire. And you remember Professor Schellnhuber, the climatologist, the founding director of the Potsdam Institute? He says, climate change is now reaching the end game. The issue is the very survival of our civilization. So yeah, it is truly ambitious, and it needs to be because of what's at stake. Demand number 3 is, before I do that, demand number 3, hands up if. Hands up if you feel that the idea of democracy, with all the stuff that goes with democracy, things like representation, accountability, legitimacy, equality, fairness, justice, freedom, and truth, the idea of democracy is appealing. Because I have to say, I do. I think that's really appealing. Let me change the question. Hands up if you think our democracies, and perhaps this could be extended to all democracies across the world, but just our democracy is working well. No hands up. And I think you're right that there's no hands up because, well, it's broken, isn't it? And it's broken in part because our democracy is not representative. If you pick any parliamentarian at random, the chances are that parliamentarian is going to be male, white, old, richer than me and you combined. There's a better than average chance that he was privately educated, and a better than average chance that he has a school friend who was also a parliamentarian. So it's not representative. Not only that, our parliamentarians, well, many of them have vested interests. That is, that they make a decision, and this decision might favour them in some kind of way in Parliament, or might favour them in some kind of way in the future, or maybe favour their families, or their families' business interests. There's split loyalties. In fact, there's lots of split loyalties for MPs. There's loyalties to their constituents. There's loyalties to the manifesto, that platform that got them voted in the first place. There's loyalties to their party, of course, that makes sense. And then there's loyalties to themselves if they want to make advancements within those parties and go up, go up the party, have a career, politicians say. Oh, and then there's loyalties to doing the right thing. And not all those loyalties might be in agreement. So there's something about our democracy that makes it difficult, puts pressure on personal integrity. Oh yeah, and our democracy is short-termist. Our government gets renewed every 4 or 5 years. So there may well be, something serious looming on the horizon, say. I can think of something, can't you? But if it's not going to happen in this particular 5-year period, well, they might say, we won't even be in power then, chances are, so why deal with it? No, let's focus on the short-term gains and forget about the long-term pains. In fact, you could argue there's been a real history of that. If we go back to 1990, remember the first IPCC report, they knew what we were facing. In fact, they knew way before that. But short-termism took over. The gain of the now rather than the pain of later. Well, that's later, we can deal with that then, they say. But if we made tweaks to the environment, made tweaks to the climate, what we were doing, CO2, then actually we would not be in the disaster that we are in now currently. Oh yeah, and I've not even talked about money, all the money that's sloshing around in government. Money, for instance, from donations from businesses to parties, or from business leaders to parties, or indeed from union leaders to parties. And I'm sure the people that are making those donations, I love that word, donations, it sounds like charity, doesn't it? But there's nothing charity about it. People making the donations, I'm sure, expect something in return for their donations. And keeping on the theme of money, what about those professional lobbyists employed by big business to get parliamentarians to gut certain laws and get other laws enacted so that their business interests are favoured? Yeah, there's something broken about our democracy. I think in large part is the reason why we're in the problems that we are in now. But there is another form of democracy that is truly representative and therefore has legitimacy. I'm going to give you the technical name. The technical name for this thing is called sortition. The non-technical name is, well, random selection. You randomly select people from the populace at large, say 100 of them, to sit on something called citizens' assemblies. Oh, and it's truly representative because it's stratified. So in here, in your citizens' assemblies, you might have about 100 people. Well, 50% of them will be women. Yeah? Oh, and there'll be poor people. And there'll be people from ethnic minorities. Yeah. There will be old, white, male, rich people, but there'll be a small proportion reflecting their proportion in society at large. There'll even be unemployed people in here too. I mean, not unemployed in this like the House of Lords unemployed. I don't mean that unemployed. I mean the real unemployed, right? And they're sitting in their citizens' assembly, and they're probably in table groups of 5 or 6 or 7. In fact, they do citizens' assembly across the world. They also did it in Ireland. They discussed the youth citizens' assembly to make a decision about same-sex marriages, and indeed the abortion laws there in Ireland. As you can see, the citizens' assembly are overviewed by judges, and they sit on tables like this. And one of the people on the tables, his job is to make sure that people with really dominant voices don't have such dominant voices, and people who are quiet, well, they're encouraged to speak, and there's also a note taker. And these people have access to good quality evidence and experts, and they consider just one issue. And they're not short-termists, and they're not career politicians, and there's no money sloshing around, and they've been randomly selected. And they're really good at making good choices. In fact, in terms of the abortion law in Ireland, 64% of them in the Citizens' Assembly said that actually the law should be changed. Women should have complete and free access to abortion. Well, that meant a change in the law. So they did a referendum in Ireland, and it turned out in the referendum in Ireland that 66% of people were in favour. 66, 64, 66, 64. Well, that's a similar number, isn't it? And you'd expect it to be a similar number because these citizens' assemblies are microcosms of society at large. So, demand number 3 is create citizens' assemblies to sit together to make decisions what we need to be doing about this climate and ecological crisis. And then citizens' assemblies to make sure that government does the things that the citizens' assemblies say they should do. So that's the 3 demands. They sound fair enough to me. Oh, here's a photograph of the House of Commons on the 28th of February 1919. They're debating, actually, carbon emissions. And the reason why they're debating this was, well, because the week before there were the climate strikes by students, and the MP for Oxford said, well, I think we should be discussing this. So along with Caroline Lucas, the Green MP, they tabled this discussion. Now, there are, in fact, 650 MPs in Parliament. 602 of them weren't there. And this was on the 28th of February 1919. In that week, we'd had the hottest winter's day on record, but 602 weren't there. So, Extinction Rebellion is a political organisation. Of course it is. We want to change in politics. We see that as being the only way forward, but it's not party political, it's apolitical. We don't care whether you are from the left or whether you are from the right or you occupy some space that, I don't know, has been left over. All we care about is that you stand up, you take part, and you join in on this single issue of climate change and ecological crisis. Got a quick question for you. Yeah, what percentage of the population is required to bring about social change? What percentage would you say you would need of the population to do that? Get a little figure, percentage in your head. This represents, society. You could use it in all sorts of different ways, but we're going to say that this is a social movement. In fact, right, this is the social movement to deal with the climate and the ecological emergency. So this is the population, and here at this end, that's us. We're the upstanders, right? We're the early takers. We're the people that want to do something about this climate and ecological crisis. And then you've got everyone else, right? And then there, right at that end, well, then you've got the anti-us. Do you know, the people that don't want to make any changes, the deniers and the delayers, and people that have vested interest perhaps in keeping the situation as it is, or maybe just people that have just come up with a different conclusion for themselves. That's entirely reasonable. Now, current, or at least classical thinking about social change is this. If you're going to give a message to society, to a groups of society, you've got to couch that message in, I don't know, positive terms. You can't just give them the bad news, right? Because if you give them the bad news, what they're going to do is they're going to jump back and go, whoa, I can't deal with this. This is just too scary, right? No, Extinction Rebellion doesn't take that approach. No, Extinction Rebellion says, tell the truth. Treat people like adults, right? Tell the truth. So what we expect to happen and what we see happen is this. Yes, some people step back and go, whoa, this is horrible. But another group is formed. And that's the group that we are particularly interested in, that group there, because this group can pull the other group with it. So let's go back to that question. What percentage of the population is required to bring about change? Well, actually, it's that percentage. It's 3.5%. Maximum. That's all it is. Yeah, 3.5%. I know this because of this lady here, Professor Erica Chenoweth. She's a professor. That means she's got a PhD. She knows what she's talking about, right? And she's discovered, by analysing 323 social movement campaigns from 1990 to 2006, that once those campaigns hit 3.5% of the population, and that 3.5% was sustained and active participation, once it crossed that threshold, it was guaranteed that the social movement would be successful, at least 1990 to 2006. But she also says, by the way, often it can be a lot less than 3.5%. For instance, these people here, these are the Freedom Riders in America. They fought against segregation laws. The way that they did it was to go on buses in the north of the country and then go to the south of the country where there were different laws, and they would get off at bus stops where black people were not allowed to get off. And there would be white people, groups of white people waiting for them, and those groups of white people would beat them up. And the police would be watching. And then the police, after they got beaten up, would go in and arrest those people who got over the buses. And they were treated so poorly, so badly. And this image, and this story was told by the journalists, that America at large was so abhorred by that treatment of this small group. There were only at most 400 of them, that laws were changed in America. So active and sustained participation. Oh, so in the UK, what does that look like? 3.5%. Remember, this is the worst case scenario. Well, that is 2.3 million. Well, okay, that's a lot. But you know what? I think some of them might be in the room here today. So what type of rebellion do we want? Well, we want an NVDA one. That is a non-violent direct action. Yeah. Why non-violent? Because, well, it's a moral prerogative. It has to be non-violent. It has to be, because that's the only moral way to be. But it turns out, actually, that being non-violent, not only is it a moral way to be, it's also a logical way to be because, well, it's more successful than violent protests, violent actions. As you can see here, against violent actions, non-NVDA is 53% more likely to be successful. And even when we're talking about partial success, it's more likely to be partially successful. One of the reasons for that is because it's non-violent, it's inclusive, it's open to everyone to join in. And because it's non-violent, you normally get at least less of a violent response from the state and from the authorities. Yeah. So, what does our non-violent direct action look like? Well, of course it's non-violent, but it also needs to be respectful. Because we're all human beings. And we're all in the same boat. We're on this planet with this ecological and climate emergency. So it's got to be respectful to everyone. It also has to be disruptive. It's got to be a nuisance value. You could, if you wanted, just give out leaflets. But that doesn't really bother anyone's day. And actually, it kind of gives a bit of a weird message. If you're just giving out leaflets and that's all you're doing, it's like you're saying, well, really, it can't be that bad after all because they're only giving out leaflets. So it's got to be disruptive. Oh, and it really helps if there's a sacrificial element. In other words, rebellion costs you something. It has an impact on you because then you're communicating to people who are seeing you sacrifice something that this stuff must be really, really important if they're prepared to give something up. I want to show you an example, a non-Extinction Rebellion example of respectful. Here's a non-Extinction Rebellion example of respectful. Those men there. The definition of respectful, actually. Here's a non-XR example of disruptive. Salt marches in India by Gandhi and his followers. It disrupted the taxation system in India. Here's a non-XR example of sacrificial. I love that picture. Of course, protesting for women's rights, equal treatment for women. Oh, and successful. The world has changed. At least our corner of the world has changed. And here's an XR example of respectful. I love that. Blocking the traffic and then moving away again and then blocking the traffic. And as you block the traffic, you show that sign, sorry for the delay. But actually we're here because we really care about you and we want you to survive and your children to survive and your grandchildren to survive. So we're doing it for us, but we're also doing it for you. We're sorry. We'll be out of your way soon. Here's a non-XR example, rather an XR example of disruptive. A cheeky example, if I can put it that way. That was during a recent Brexit debate. Yeah, 650 MPs were there for that one. Here's an XR example of sacrificial. Another great photograph. It's costing her something. It must be serious if she's prepared to give up her liberty. So then, what can you do? Well, what you can do is stop using coffee cups, right? And you know those Johnson cotton buds for your ears, don't use that. And stop using plastic straws. And if you think that change is going to change climate change, you need to change your mind because that's going to change nothing. I mean, right, yeah, sure, don't do it, right? That's appropriate. But it's got to be much bigger than that. I mean, if you want to make personal changes, sure, make those personal changes. You should. But if you really want to make personal changes, well, move to a plant-based diet. Don't fly. Don't drive a car. If you have to drive a car, drive an electric car. But the real trick, given the size of the crisis, right, is to stand up, take part, join in with something bigger than we are as individuals. Have our voice and our actions amplified. So then, what specifically can you do? Well, what you can do is get arrested. Yep, that's it. That's what I want you. I want you to get arrested. I want you to cross over that thin blue line and get arrested. Except you don't have to. Absolutely not. There's lots of people in XR who are prepared to get arrested, and you do not have to be one of them. That's got to be surely a personal decision for yourself, right? But what you can do, and you can definitely do this, because everyone has, number one, what you can do is you can donate your talent, your skills, and your time, because we all have talent, we all have skills, we all have time. And two, well, you could become backroom support for XR at their head office. You could, for instance, get active on social media. You could become a travel coordinator for XR. You could produce art, music, drama, or if you're in a choir, well, have an XR choir, and then have a speaker to do 10 minutes about the climate and environmental crisis. Organize a talk, like you did. Organize a talk, or deliver a talk, like I did. Or get involved in finance or fundraising, or provide well-being at an action. Or if you're good at first aid, become a first aid person at action, or a legal observer, or become, say, a steward at an action. Or maybe just attend the action and chant and blockade and do the things that you're required, but before you get arrested, because you can, step away. But though, stand up, take part, join in. Be a part of the 3.5%. Turn up to an XR event and you're already a member of XR, but nevertheless that means you can go onto their mailing list, for instance, or join on Facebook, and you can see the sorts of things that they're doing. Find out who your local group is and join that. I'm going to show you some heroes. These people here, you've already seen them, are heroes. They were brave, they had integrity. They sacrificed something. Heroes. They were heroes. She was a hero. She is a hero. And I love the similarities between these two photographs. That one and that one. 100 years or so separates them. But what doesn't separate them is the type of people they are. Brave, integrity, working for the greater good. They're heroes. They're heroes. She's a hero. They're heroes. He's a hero. They're heroes. They're heroes. And look at the smiles on his face. Look at the smiles. Do you know why I think they're smiling? I think they're smiling because they know that they're doing the right thing. That's why I think they're smiling. And she's a hero, and the people standing behind her are heroes. Let's read her placard. What does she say? Climate change is real. In other news, water is wet. And she's a hero. And he's a hero. And they are heroes. And they are heroes. I love that photograph. All those hands glued on. With glued on written on so the police can see that they're glued on, which makes it more difficult for them to be moved. In fact, they've got to be separated, and that's a slow business. And you can see the telephone numbers there. That's the telephone numbers of the solicitors and also the telephone numbers of the back rooms in Extinction Rebellion. But I love that sense of unity, that sense of coming together, that amplified voice, that amplified action. Oh, and they're heroes. And they're heroes. These young people are heroes. I was watching this on live stream on Facebook, and I cried during it. In fact, I was in sobs of tears during this, because I'm watching these, well, there was 8 at one point, and I'm watching these young people, sort of year 9, year 10, year 11, 13, 14, 15, and I could see sometimes on one of them the bottom lip was going, because all these adults were around, just the tension, the stress of this, and I'm crying because she is being so fantastically brave, and then spontaneously they start singing. And I mean more tears, right? And then this boy turns up with the blonde hair, and it's taken him 4 hours to get there, and he's had to do it on bus. And he turns up and joins in. And she's a hero. 15 when she started those strikes. She's a hero. She's got Asperger's. Maybe that makes her a superhero. Do you know? Maybe that's her gift. And I quote what she says. She says, "Our civilization is being sacrificed for the opportunity of a very small number of people to continue making enormous amounts of money." And that's it, isn't it? That's what this is about. She says, "The future of all coming generations rests on your shoulders." Whose shoulders? My shoulders. Whose shoulders? Your shoulders. What you do now, we children can't undo in the future. So please treat the crisis as the crisis it is and give us a future. Tell the truth and act as though that truth is real. When we start to act, hope is everywhere. So stop looking for hope. Look for action. Then hope will come. Stand up. Take part. Join in. Or to put it another way, be like Phil.
I'm Phil Kingston. I'm 82. I can't actually remember the numbers, probably about 11 I expect. Once, to occupying a bank, And the other was going to the Brazilian embassy. We had a crowbar, but that was all a bit beyond us when we got there. I'd say it's 11 times. I've been arrested 11 times. I was arrested 4 times in 12 days when we were working with Extinction Rebellion. Some criminal damage. One was intending to write with chalk spray paint outside Downing Street. Another was actually doing that same thing in Whitehall, act now. I didn't think I was doing criminal damage. I thought I was speaking the truth. There was a freelance photographer and he said, what are you charged with? And I said, protecting the earth. And he said, where are they taking you? And I said, heaven. So, yeah. I take the law very seriously. I was a probation officer and I was training probation officers, basically a law-abiding guy. But when the law is supporting corporations in ruining the earth, I'm not accepting that at all. Because elders are not usually doing this in this country, it's a bit of a shock to people. We have extraordinary social power if we're willing to use it. If there's any elders out there, please listen to that. Come and join us. Many of us are in a position where we have nothing to lose. You know, I've had a long life, a good life. I'm a very fortunate man. And if this is the way I go out, I wouldn't ask for anything more. Money is being put before everything. It's not going to work. The earth cannot be paid for. There's that saying of the Sioux Indians that when the last fish is caught, we will know that we cannot eat money. And it's on the way.
What one thing would you like to say to people?
Yeah, it's to love each other and to love the earth. And let money be at the service of those two. I think I'm growing up at last.
Now, isn't that something? To finish with 3 questions. What does it mean to be a good human being? Question 2. What does it mean to die without regrets? Question 3. Will you be able to look your grandchildren in the eye and say you did what you could? If not you, who? If not now, when? Stand up, take part, join in. Thank you.